What's going on, everyone? So every year there are those sleeper teams, those teams that are projected to be pretty bad or mediocre, and end up surprising people, right? The Cavs did it a couple years ago. Last year, you saw the Utah Jazz. They were like the number one seed in the West for a while, and then usually those teams come back down to reality. They start making the decisions of like, okay, well, we're not winning anything this year, so let's try to compete for a better draft pick. But sometimes those teams actually do make a push and could surprise some people. Now, I wanted to kind of break down and go over a couple teams that I think could potentially have like the Utah Jazz effect. Another team last year was like the Pelicans, right? The Pelicans, their problem became injuries, right? But before injuries, they were the number one seed in the Western Conference. Every metric, every rating was like ridiculous, and they were actually really good. And then Zion again gets hurt, Brandon Ingram misses a bunch of time, and then they end up fighting for a play-in spot. But there are a couple teams, primarily in the Eastern Conference. I don't really think any team in the Western Conference is really gonna be this huge shocker. Like, I think the Thunder will be better next year. The Pelicans, if they can stay healthy. Timberwolves, if they can actually play together, they could be pretty interesting. Dallas, I'm not super sold on. The Jazz, I think that like that fluke that happened last year, because I mean ultimately it became a fluke. They ended up finishing 12th, but I don't think that will be a thing again this year. I think for the most part the Western Conference is exactly how you think it will go. But when you look at the Eastern Conference, it's like the Bulls. I don't expect them to be much better, if better at all. And they may end up just imploding and trading everybody. The Raptors, I think, are going to be worse this year. The Heat, we'll see if they get Dame or not. If not, they're probably a play-in team again, right? Like, I don't know if they'll be able to be on the top echelons of the Eastern Conference. Atlanta, they're kind of hit or miss. There's talks about Trey wanting out and stuff like that. But who are those teams that could really kind of sneak into like a play-in spot, playoff spot, and just be a tough matchup for some teams, right? Again, these aren't teams that I think will necessarily win anything, but just put up an effort, put up a fight. First one that comes to mind is the Orlando Magic, right? Orlando, they have had a lot of promise the last like 2 years. They're a very young team, right? They're a very talented team, but the last 2 years, they've had like entire month stretches where they were like the best defensive team and like top three offense, right? Like, but they just seem to not be able to sustain that over the course of a season. But like literally, they'll have like a month every year the last few years where they look like the best team in the league and they're ridiculous. And Paolo Banchero, you'd imagine year two, he should be taking a step up. Franz Wagner, you imagine he continues to grow and develop and be a key piece. And Orlando's kind of weird because it's like they have like a bunch of guards and like a bunch of big men, right? And it's like, can it work? Can they figure it out? How are they going to structure this team? But in the Eastern Conference, I mean, like, I don't really see many teams that are that much better than them if they can put it all together this year, right? I think if the Orlando Magic can actually take those strides on both sides of the basketball and be locked in on both sides of the basketball, I think the Orlando Magic could really be a team that kind of sneaks in to like that seventh or eighth spot even, right? I think for the most part, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Sixers, the Cavs, the Knicks, those five teams are very likely going to be the top five teams. The Nets, I'm actually super high on the Nets. Not like that they win an NBA championship or come out the East, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Nets are like third or fourth, right, in the Eastern Conference this year. Mikal Bridges kind of taking that step. If Ben Simmons can kind of get back in a playoff form, but they were a playoff team last year, right? Not a play-in team, like literally a playoff team, right? They were sixth, but still, they were a playoff team. The Hawks, the Heat, the Raptors, and the Bulls are like the other five teams that I kind of, or the other four teams that I actually kind of question where do they fall in the standings, right? If the Heat end up getting Dame, then that changes everything, of course. But let's go assuming where we are right now. I really think the Orlando Magic have a real shot of overtaking the Bulls, the Raptors, the Heat, or the Hawks, which would put them, in the play-in. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're, an eighth seed going into the playoffs, getting ready to take on the Bucks, or maybe a 7 seed going on to take on the Celtics. I really do think this squad has the talent and has the youth to really grind out an 82 game season. Can they just put it together? That's the real question. But the most likely, in my opinion, is the Indiana Pacers, right? Like, I really think the Pacers might actually be very good this year. And they showed those flashes, they showed those glimpses, right? Like, they were like, what, the 3rd or 4th seed, I think, for a little while there last season. And then they kind of had that stretch where they regress, injuries, things like that, right? Like, if guys can stay healthy and together, the Indiana Pacers could be pretty formidable, right? Like, Tyrese Halliburton should only continue to improve and get better. He's been killing it for Team USA, right? He's been a real standout for Team USA. He just had a great game today with like 18 points and 6 assists, and he's just been a steady, solid, consistent type star player that is the franchise cornerstone for the Indiana Pacers. But outside of that, Mathurin, you'd imagine he continues to take strides, continues to take steps. Buddy Hield is one of the better three-point shooters in the league. Miles Turner, we'll see how that relationship works out. He signed that new deal, but it's kind of like, structured in a weird way. I mean, it declines every year, but there have been kind of talks about him wanting out, about the Pacers wanting to trade him, right? So, like, if things are kind of so-so for the Pacers this year, does Miles Turner say, like, all right, it's time to trade me? That's something that could happen. But I think that they have nice depth. I think they have nice youth. I think they have a good balance of just all the intangibles you need to have some success. Again, I don't think that they're a contender or anything like that by any means, but I do think that they are a team that could really make some noise this year. I think they're a team that could easily be at least a play-in team, maybe even a playoff team, right? And I do think that they could give some fits to some of these players. I still think they need that, like, elite perimeter guy. Like, if they could go and kind of push their chips to the table and go get, like, a Pascal Siakam or something like that, then I think you talk about the Pacers being, like, maybe top 4 good, right? With Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, Benedict Mathurin, if you get, like, a Pascal Siakam and keep a Buddy Hield, right? Like, you'd have a good mixture of, like, defense, scoring, just everything, right? Like, I don't know. Like, they need a legit 3-and-D style guy. Like, if Jeremy Grant was making reasonable money, I'd say, like, go after him. Like, he would be, I think, a solid addition. But they kind of still need that, like, elite 3-and-D guy. That, like, elite point of attack defensive guy. But they're definitely a team that I think could really step up. I think the addition of Obi Toppin was a solid one. I think he could really kind of round out this roster nicely and use his length and athleticism and stuff to help on both sides of the basketball. Again, Indiana, if I had to, like, bet on any team to, like, make those strides and kind of get into the playoffs, it would be the Indiana Pacers. I actually really like their squad. Again, I don't think that they're beating, the Bucks or the Celtics in the first round. But, like, if they were to, like, match up against, like, the Knicks or the Cavs or something like that, it wouldn't really shock me, right? I don't think they're as good as those teams, but I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up beating them. Tyrese Halliburton just has, like, an amazing playoff stretch during that series, and Miles Turner is just, like, really good on both sides of the basketball, right? Like, I could see something along those lines. But last team I kind of want to talk about is the Washington Wizards. Now, the Wizards are really kind of interesting to me because I think the Wizards go one of two ways. I think either the Wizards are, like, really bad and, like, can't really win games. Like, they score a bunch of points, but they can't really win games. Or they're actually pretty good, right? That's why I wanted to put them, like, third on this list because I think the Wizards are going to have more defined roles and are going to be more reliable now than they were in the previous years. And by that, I mean, like, Bradley Beal was always, like, in a couple games, out a couple games, right? Like, he's always, like, getting injured, and then he's the number one guy when he's in it, but then it's like he's gone, so then now it's like, who's the other number one guy? And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, and then you go and get Kristaps Porzingis, and it's like, okay, well, he's solid, but, like, he doesn't seem to work at times. Like, sometimes he's, like, great and, like, ridiculous, and then sometimes he's just, like, looks like he just doesn't fit on this roster. And then, he's out some games and then in some games. And it's just kind of been this like mess for Washington where now it's like, all right, Kyle Kuzma, he gets to kind of be the guy alongside Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole's a guy that I think can go get you 30 any given night. I think Washington definitely puts up a bunch of points, right? I just wonder are they going to be able to stop people, right? Can they be good defensively? Jordan Poole's not really a great defensive guy. Kyle Kuzma is hit or miss at times, right? Tyus Jones, I think, is solid, but he can get burnt a lot. But you look at this roster, it's like, okay, you got Tyus Jones, who I think is a very solid point guard. He's a guy that's going to be able to kind of be the glue guy, keep everything together, make sure Jordan Poole eats, make sure Kyle Kuzma eats. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Tyus Jones is like 8 to 10 assists per game. Like, seriously. Like, I do. Like, I think that they have, like, with their scorers and their shooters and stuff, he's a guy that can knock down the three ball. I can see him really kind of being like, I don't know, maybe like a 10 and 10 guy. Because I don't think they're going to want him to score a ton. I think they're going to kind of want him, like Jordan Poole's going to get his 30. Kyle Kuzma probably gets his 25 or whatever, right? And so, like, there's the bulk of your scoring. I think Tyus Jones is just kind of like the facilitator, right? He's just the guy that's getting everything going. But then outside of that, you got Daniel Gafford, who I really think is solid and a nice young center that has a lot of promise. Denai Aja, like, I think he's a guy that could be very solid for this team. He showed some real flashes last year. DeLon Wright, I think, will be a solid backup point guard, right? You got a couple of the rookies. We'll see how they shine, how they do grow and develop. But to me, they're really hit or miss, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, when the season's over, they're like the 6th seed. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they're like 12th, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, they're going to be really good offensively, I think. I think they're going to score a bunch of points. But can they consistently be good on offense? And are they going to be able to stop anybody, right? Like, are they going to be able to actually defend and play both sides of the basketball? And if they can, right? And I'm not talking about like them having to be elite, right? Because I don't think that they're going to be an elite defensive team by any stretch of the imagination, even if everybody just bought in 110% on defense. But I think that they could be serviceable enough to where, like, offensively, you're going to get the output. Defensively, if you can just be serviceable enough on the defensive end to get key stops here and there, they're going to win more games than they lose. So that's another team that I kind of look at and go, all right, like, they could be very interesting. I think that they have a lot of nice young pieces that fit well together, right? I think Tyus Jones is arguably the most important piece on that team just because of his unselfishness, his ability to play both sides of the basketball, his willingness to facilitate, right? Like, Memphis, by like every metric, Memphis was actually better with Tyus Jones than Ja in many areas, right? Because he's more of that like traditional, where Ja is more of like downhill, it's just go drop 40 on you, right? Where Tyus Jones, like, he can shoot, he can score, he can do everything, but he's really good at just doing the little things, doing the hustle plays, getting guys going, hitting guys in their spots, right? Like, I think that that's going to be a big factor. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Which one of these teams do you think like could be a real standout? Do you agree with sort of my top 3 list? Is there somebody else you'd add on this list? Again, how you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments.